Welcome to the Expanding Worlds podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Caldo, and welcome to a new series on housing options. Over this series, the aim has been to find out about as many different models as possible, because everyone's different and what will work for one person won't necessarily work for another. And this is something that this week's guest, Kathy Meyer from Everyone Needs a Community, really understands. Kathy not only discusses the importance of remembering that all of our children have different needs, but that the communities that we live in are different as well, and that this needs to feed into how we put together a housing solution that will work for our individual children. We also talk about a concept I'd never heard of before, microboards, and Kathy does a good job of explaining those. And I put links in the show notes to different websites that you can look at, because I think it's a really important concept for parents to consider. There's also links to Everyone Needs a Community website and their Facebook page. And as well as that, there's links to a YouTube channel that Kathy has put together. And there's a couple of videos on there that are definitely worth a watch. But enough from me, let's hear from Kathy. Thank you very much, Kathy, for joining me today. Could you just, first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself and then also what Everyone Needs a Community is all about?
I am a mother of an almost 28-year-old young man with autism. I have another son who's a couple of years younger. And we have been down the road of challenges of autism, my son Matt's whole life. We were very fortunate in the beginning. We were able to get some of the applied behavioral therapy when he was younger, which was very helpful. But at this stage, as you get to high school and beyond, there is no place for many of these people to go to live. My son does not have skills to be independent at all. He's not safe. He's impulsive. If he sees something attractive, he would run across a 4-lane highway. He is startled and unnerved by cars starting. So in a parking lot, for him, it's like running through a field with landmines. And it's very difficult to keep him safe. So as we've gone on our journey and learned more about the bigger view and realized, and of course, there's a big goal to have people live in the community and not be sequestered in these places that were overcrowded and not really serving them. And now, at least in the US, people are to aim at the least restrictive environment. So as we look around, there is no one size fits all for autism. Every person with autism is very different. So there's lots of different models that need to be invented. And right now, I'm not the only parent who's trying to do this. My husband is very involved as well. And I can give you a little bit of history of how we got on this trail. In that, as we're wondering, what will happen? What can we do to secure my son's future when we're not there? At an autism meeting where the subtitle about housing was having parents live forever is not a plan. Of course, parents don't live forever. And shortly thereafter, one of our local churches put on a social event called A Night to Shine. And that was a prom for people with disabilities. It was an amazing evening because everyone who was there understood. And everyone there accepted everything that happened. And I thought to myself, how could we grow this into a community? And I had no idea how to do that. My background, I'm a surgeon. So then by chance, I saw in a newspaper an article about a community out in Massachusetts called Treehouse Community. And Treehouse Community is where they brought together people with families who were adopting children who have experienced foster care. And what was also unique about this community was that many of the retirement age people had taken the foster parent training, making their community a trauma-informed community. This was like the ideal model to say we could have an autism-informed community that has a component of retirement age people, as well as families, as well as individuals on the autism spectrum. And in a community like that, we could open up new opportunities. One of the things that we've talked about is the all-day cafe. In the community center, we could have a place where you could go out for coffee and volunteer while someone maybe like my son is learning how to wait on you. Only go there if you have all day, because there's going to be a lot of faux pas. There's going to be a lot of unpredictability, but it's something that isn't generally available for practice for people. And we've taken this idea out to church groups, employee groups, all different kinds of groups, and people love it. They think this would be great. In fact, I've had people say, I wish this existed already. I'm ready to move in tomorrow. Basically, what's expected is that people volunteer 6 hours a week. Retirement age people are particularly appealing because they have time. Many people don't have time. It's not a strict 6-hour thing, and many of the people with time do it more. In Treehouse, they are, starting their own clubs for different interests. Some of them fly, some of them don't. And the comment of one of the women there that we met was, I never imagined that at this stage of my life, I could have this kind of a life. And it's socially very active. There's a lot of energy in those people. And we all know that as we age, having a reason to get out of bed in the morning and being socially engaged in something that brings you joy, it's good for your health. It's good for everything. So here we have what appears to be a win-win situation. One of the reasons that it's really important to have a group of people who understand autism is because autism is one of the reasons that people become homeless. Because there are things about the way a person with autism may think that get them into trouble. And one of the weaknesses in autism is a lack of self-awareness and lack of social understanding. So there was a young man in a county nearby who was autistic and had been living in his apartment for 3 years in an apartment for people with disabilities until he got arrested for cutting the cords on the vacuum cleaner in his building for the second time. Now, those of us who live with autism and understand these sensory sensitivities and the inability to negotiate a social situation, we understood this was a sensory issue. And that those of us who are used to dealing with that would have scheduled the vacuuming perhaps when he was at work, perhaps warned him so he could put on a noise cancellation headset or something else that would have resolved the problem. But instead, police were called, he was arrested, and his parents, fortunately, were still alive, and he was taken to court. But fortunately, and this doesn't always happen, the judge recognized that he wasn't competent and said, okay, there's no criminal intent here. You need to get guardianship so you can advocate for him in the future and help to protect him. But the unhappy part of that situation was that he was still evicted from his building. And so suddenly you have someone who's homeless that if his parents weren't in the picture, he would be homeless. There is nothing in our social system that will scoop someone like him up and see to it they're taken care of. Everybody's a case to be managed. That personal touch isn't there. So we thought, well, what if his neighbor could have advocated for him? What if, the community understood? Somebody could have told the manager. Well, one of the beauties of the treehouse model is it's actually 3 components. It's a component of the treehouse staff, the management of the property, and the social services, Berkshire Children and Families of Massachusetts. So with those 3 talking to one another, you can make things successful for housing. You can help the management understand new solutions to a problem. And we thought that that is ideal. The social services piece can help identify what services this person might need, what other agency that might need to be brought in to help them. But we could envision making successful housing for people who otherwise are very vulnerable to homelessness. I should know the number, but I don't know it off the top of my head. But there are hundreds of thousands of people who are autistic, who are not capable of living independently with just services, who are living with parents over 60 years old. So there's this big bubble on the horizon that I would like to call pre-homelessness. It's programmed into the system that if we don't figure out different housing options, they're going to be homeless. They don't all have relatives who can take them in. Many of them are really a huge commitment to take care of. And it's very frightening what it looks like. So this model that we hope to create this community, and we hope that it also will be a prototype for other people to do the same. Because just as each person with autism is different, each community is different. I'm in a rural community. The community I live in is about 18,600 people. Autism is expected to be about 2% of the population. So one would anticipate over 300 people with autism in our community, many of whom are living with relatives, many of whom are relatively independent, but still would benefit from social things that recognize supports that would be helpful to them. And also volunteer activities and social opportunities that they might not otherwise have. Likewise, with our aging population of boomers, there's many are looking for meaningful things to do, learning something new, and doing things on their own terms. And so whether you do things for 6 hours a week or whether you choose to do it 12 hours a week, this model is very flexible. And for those in our area who are what we call snowbirds, that migrate south in the winter. They could do that and still participate in a community like this. So we have been working very hard. We have worked with our city. The housing the city needs, among other housing, is low-end rental and affordable rental. And so that's what we're looking at, as well as the piece I haven't figured out how to provide, which is home ownership, where people can buy a lot and build something custom. Because many families would like to live in a duplex where the parents live in one side and the person who needs a little more support lives in the other side. And so that for as long as they can be part of the support for that person. And yet the person with special needs can get to know a community and we can raise other advocates. Also, there's an interesting model out of Canada called a microboard. The concept of a microboard is creating a nonprofit organization around a single person with a disability. Now, in the US, a nonprofit organization is one that is run by a board of directors that stewards a public trust. So basically, with this serving one person, they wouldn't particularly have to handle money, but they could know this person and help them advocate for their needs, and for their desires, and for their best interests. In a community like this, we could potentially recruit a lot of board members for different boards and have people keep an eye out for whether anybody's being abused by help or other things, and also know them well enough to know what their special interests are so that they can advocate for funding for things that would make their lives more meaningful. So we look at just a lot of different opportunities, both for people with disabilities and for our volunteers. We think that the sky's the limit for creating meaningful lives for everyone who lives in the community. And so we're very excited. We have a developer that's very interested, that does the rental property and the affordable housing. They have already built a 40-unit apartment building down in a small town in New Glarus, Wisconsin, where they reserve 10 of 40 units for people with autism. And so they're getting their feet wet. We feel very good about having a mutual common goal. We're very excited. We're still, a couple years off from, the big parts of development, but we feel that we have the support of our city. We have the support of our developer. And we also are talking to other organizations in our area who also advocate for these people and work with them. So we have a local organization, Opportunity Development Center, that does a lot of the pre-vocational work as well as day services. And we know we don't want to duplicate services. And in fact, we're ENC, which is Everyone Needs a Community. That's us. The model is that we are a catalyst organization, not a service provider. So we're someone who will work with these others to say, ODC, who is pre-vocational, well, bring your folks up for the all-day cafe. How often should we host it? Well, we can discuss that. We can see how often we have volunteers. Would we need to schedule them? Things of that sort. But basically working with other organizations to create opportunities that benefit everyone. Yeah, so working with other like-minded organizations is a big piece of what we do. And we're looking at volunteers to spread out different kinds of work that are needed for running a nonprofit. And so, building one from scratch is something we're still learning how to do. But, it's amazing when people, we get greeted with so much support that there's no possibility of slowing down. It's just, yes, the pandemic was a bummer. Lockdown happened weeks after our very first public event. And so, yes, we have been isolated, but, we were already doing Zoom meetings before lockdown because many of our parents are essentially locked down, because we can't get out because of our parental responsibilities. So we were already on Zoom before lockdown. Do you have questions for me now that I've been to your ear thoroughly?
I do actually. And I think what you're talking about here is stopping people being isolated. And that equally applies to young people or older people with additional needs and people that are retired as well. I mean, that seems to be the common theme. I'm just wondering about the practicalities of the housing and how that, you said you work with as a builder. How does that work with them? Do they provide the funding? Do you provide funding? Because I'm assuming you're building a series of homes. Are you building like a certain number of units?
Yes, our developer does rental property. And the model that we're looking at, we would like to do essentially cottages that will likely be in duplexes and triplexes. So basically single level. We don't have a rendering yet. Basically treehouse, if one looks that up in East Hampton, Massachusetts, you can see how they're housing for their retirement age people is triplexes of 1-bedroom apartments. Their next model is to have some 2-bedroom apartments as well. We haven't really done the pre-planning yet, but basically the cottage model is one that we would like to see happen. And basically the ones in Treehouse are appealing because everybody has a front porch and a back patio, and it's set up for socialization. You can actually talk to your neighbor from your front porch if you wish, but yet it's not a whole row. They're turned in such a way you don't have everybody flipping burgers down the row. And so it's very socially conducive to having good relationships. Now, as far as funding, one of the things available in the United States is funding from the Housing and Urban Development Agency, and that's distributed to states to be distributed by the states in ways that they see fit. So basically, there's a competition, obviously, for those funds. They're called low-income housing tax credits. And basically, these are tax credits that are then sold to corporations to create a tax credit with the government. So that is a big part of the funding that makes the affordable units affordable. There's other low interest loans. The developer we're working with is a nonprofit developer that makes them eligible for certain kinds of lower interest loans. And then our organization will have a balance funding that we need to come up with. Initially, the balance funding that the organization of parents down in New Glarus had was about $1 million. And so for us, it's $1 million, but we also would like to have ENC staff. And so looking at the Treehouse staff, their ideal model runs about $400,000 to $500,000 a year. From our small town, that's not possible to sustain. So we need to work statewide and nationwide to find people who support this kind of endeavor. That's basically what the funding looks like right now, is a combination of a number of different things. Treehouse had about 7 different funders, which is not unusual. So that's where we are. Yeah, fundraising is for a capital campaign, and ultimately our operational expenses is going to be certainly a big challenge. It's not easy from any standpoint, which is why I think the model of having social services right there to help and knowing what opportunities are available and what resources someone might need is key to keeping people in housing. Now, I guess another thing I should say is, how big should we grow this community? Well, there's a size between 100 and 150 people that you can know everybody by name and know them. Beyond that, it's too big for this project. One would need to spin off another community. Now, some things that parents are already doing is grouping together and buying townhouses around a cul-de-sac. So they create their own communities. That's very possible. I live in a small town where one of the things that's missing is a place that's appealing people who've lived out on farms and things who could not possibly move into an apartment building. They need that sky. They need that space feeling. It has to be unique to what the needs are in each area. This is not a formula so much as an inspiration.
Thanks for listening. I don't know about you, but I think that everyone needs a community is pretty inspiring. It's an amazing idea, and it's obviously been built by looking at what other people are doing, which is where all great ideas really come from, building on what we learn from others. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please do share it with others. Feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to the podcast. And of course, if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Just get in touch, Deborah@expandingworlds.com, or you can find me online at Deborah Caldo.